The morning started like any other morning on New Terra. The sun rose over the green hills and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. Captain Daniel Hayes stood on the observation deck of the small military outpost and watched the colony wake up below him. 3,000 people called this world home now. They had farms and schools and small houses with gardens where children played. It had taken 15 years to build all of this from nothing. Daniel took a sip of his coffee and smiled. His second-in-command, Karen White, walked up beside him with her own cup. She looked tired but happy. They had been running security drills all week and everyone was exhausted. Karen made a joke about how their biggest problem these days was keeping the local wildlife away from the crops. Daniel laughed because it was true. They had not seen any real danger in years. The galaxy seemed peaceful and humanity was making friends with new species every month. Down in the colony, Lisa Morgan was already at work in her research center. She was a botanist and she loved her job more than anything. The plants on New Terra were fascinating and she had spent years studying them. Her team was small but dedicated. They worked in a building made of local materials and earth technology. Through the windows she could see the fields where farmers were starting their day. Everything felt normal and safe. Paul Stevens was getting his daughter Amy ready for school. She was 8 years old and full of energy. She talked non-stop about her friends and her classes while Paul made her breakfast. His wife had already left for work at the water treatment facility. Paul worked as an engineer at the power station. It was a good life and they were happy here. They had left Earth 5 years ago looking for a fresh start, and they had found it on New Terra. The Valkyrie ships appeared in the sky without any warning at all. One moment the sky was clear and blue, and the next moment it was filled with silver vessels that looked like knives cutting through the atmosphere. The ships descended fast and people in the colony stopped what they were doing to stare up in confusion. No one had announced any visitors. No ships were scheduled to arrive today. Daniel dropped his coffee cup and ran to the command center. Karen was right behind him. They reached the communications room and started trying to contact the approaching ships. The standard greeting protocols got no response. Daniel felt his stomach twist with worry. Something was very wrong. He ordered his small garrison to battle stations even though he knew they were not prepared for a real fight. They had 20 soldiers and some basic defensive weapons. That was all. The first Valkyrie ship opened fire on the communications tower and it exploded in a ball of flame and debris. The blast shook the entire outpost. Daniel grabbed the emergency transmitter and started recording a message. His hands were shaking, but his voice came out steady. He explained what was happening and asked for help. He described the attacking ships and said the Valkyrie were showing no mercy at all. He managed to say that New Terra was fighting to the last before another explosion knocked him off his feet. Lisa heard the explosions from her research center and looked out the window in horror. The sky was full of alien ships and they were firing at everything. Buildings were exploding and people were running in every direction trying to find shelter. She saw her colleagues frozen in shock around her. Then the center's alarm started blaring and she knew they had to evacuate right now. They ran for the emergency exits, but the building shook from an impact. Fire spread through the hallways behind them. Lisa made it outside, but when she looked back, 3 of her team members were trapped inside. She tried to go back, but someone grabbed her arm and pulled her away. The building collapsed moments later. Paul grabbed Amy and ran. His wife was across town at the water facility and he had no way to reach her. The streets were chaos. People were screaming and crying and dying. The Valkyrie soldiers had landed now and they were hunting civilians through the burning streets. Paul saw things that would haunt him forever. He saw families gunned down as they tried to flee. He saw children separated from their parents. He saw the systematic destruction of everything humanity had built here. He found a group of survivors heading for the emergency transport pad on the edge of the colony. They ran through smoke and fire while explosions shook the ground beneath their feet. Amy was crying and holding onto him so tight he could barely breathe. Other people joined them as they ran. Lisa was there covered in ash and burns. Karen was there bleeding from a head wound but still helping others move faster. They reached the transport pad and found one damaged ship that might still fly. Daniel made it to the transport pad last. Half his face was burned and he was limping badly. He had stayed at the outpost trying to hold off the Valkyrie soldiers long enough for civilians to escape. Most of his garrison was dead now. He climbed onto the transport ship and helped seal the doors. There were 47 people crowded into a space meant for 20. The pilot was dead, so Karen took the controls even though she had never flown this type of ship before. The transport lifted off just as Velkari fighters spotted them. Weapons fire tore through the hull and several people died instantly. The ship shook and alarms screamed warnings about failing systems. Karen pushed the engines to maximum and aimed for orbit. Behind them, New Terra burned. The colony that had taken 15 years to build was being destroyed in hours. The farms were on fire. The schools were rubble. The homes where families had lived were nothing but craters now. They made it to orbit on emergency power alone. The ship was falling apart around them. Life support was failing and they had no weapons or shields left. Paul held Amy close and tried to cover her eyes, but she had already seen too much. Lisa stared at nothing and trembled in shock. Daniel recorded everything he could on a data chip that he kept in his pocket. The security cameras had captured it all before they were destroyed. He had proof of what the Velkari had done. The damaged transport limped through space for 3 weeks. They had barely enough supplies to survive. People died from their injuries because they had no medical equipment. The survivors huddled together and tried to process what had happened. They talked in quiet voices about the friends and family they had lost, about the life they had built that was gone now, about the Velkari and why they had attacked without warning or mercy. When they finally reached Earth Station Gamma, they were more dead than alive. Station personnel rushed to help them and get them medical care. Daniel handed over his data chip to the military officers who met them. He told them everything while doctors worked on his burns. He described how the Velkari had not given any warning at all, how they had targeted civilians deliberately, how they had hunted children through burning streets, how they had destroyed everything without reason or explanation. Lisa sat in a medical bay and stared at her hands. They were still covered in ash from her research center. The doctors had treated her burns, but they could not fix what was broken inside her mind. She kept seeing her colleagues trapped in the fire. She kept hearing their screams. She wondered if this was what war felt like. If this was what happened when one species decided another species did not matter. Paul finally got word about his wife 3 days after reaching the station. She had not made it off New Terra. He held Amy while they both cried. His daughter was only 8 years old and she had watched her entire world end in fire and death. He did not know how to help her heal from this. He did not know how to heal himself. The survivors carried more than trauma when they reached Earth Station Gamma. They carried proof of what the Velkari had done, video footage that showed every atrocity in clear detail, evidence that the Velkari had not just destroyed a colony, but had tried to send a message to all of humanity. That message said humans were weak and soft, that humans would negotiate and forgive, that humans were not worth respecting or fearing. The Velkari were about to learn how catastrophically wrong they were about humanity. They were about to discover that mercy and forgiveness had limits, that even the most peaceful species would fight when pushed beyond those limits, that humanity remembered its dead and would answer for them. The survivors from New Terra brought fire back to Earth with them, not the fire that had destroyed their homes, but a different kind of fire, the fire of rage and determination, the fire that would forge humanity into something the galaxy had never seen before, something that would make the Velkari regret the day they ever heard the name New Terra. The emergency session of the United Earth Assembly began 3 hours after the survivors reached the station. Every delegate was present and the chamber was completely silent as President Helen Brooks walked to the podium. Her face showed no emotion, but everyone could see the anger burning in her eyes. Behind her, a massive screen displayed footage from New Terra. The images showed civilians running from alien soldiers, children being hunted through burning streets, families torn apart by weapons fire. The systematic destruction of everything humanity had built over 15 years. Helen let the footage play for 10 minutes without saying a word. She wanted every person in that chamber to see exactly what had happened, to understand what the Velkari had done to innocent people who had never threatened anyone. When the footage ended, she finally spoke and her voice was cold as ice. She explained that the Velkari had attacked without warning or provocation, that they had targeted civilians deliberately, that they had sent a message through their actions, a message that said humanity was weak and would not fight back. Admiral Richard Cole stood beside the president in his full military uniform. He was an old man with gray hair and hard eyes who had fought in the border wars decades ago. He understood that peace only lasted when backed by strength. Next to him stood General Susan Price of the Marine Corps. She was younger but just as experienced in combat. Both of them had reviewed all the intelligence reports about the Velkari. Both of them knew what needed to happen next. Helen continued her speech and told the assembly that the Velkari believed humans were sheep to be slaughtered when convenient. That they thought human mercy was actually cowardice. That they expected negotiations and apologies and forgiveness. She paused and looked at every delegate in the chamber, before saying that humanity needed to educate the Velkari about how wrong they were. The vote came quickly and it was unanimous. Every single delegate voted to authorize military action against the Velkari Empire. For the first time in 40 years, humanity was going to war. Admiral Cole activated Protocol Prometheus within minutes of the vote. It was Earth's contingency plan for existential threats, and it had not been used since it was created. Every shipyard from Mars to the Kuiper Belt received new orders immediately. They would stop all civilian construction and shift to military production. Factories that made transport ships would now make warships. Facilities that built satellites would now build weapons. The entire industrial capacity of humanity turned toward a single purpose. The fleet was recalled from all its peaceful patrols across human space. Ships that had been exploring new systems or protecting trade routes came home. Each one went directly to the nearest shipyard for combat refits. Weapon systems that had been theoretical for years moved into production. Scientists who had been working on peaceful research projects were reassigned to military development. Humanity's industrial might that had been built over centuries of expansion now focused on war. Commander Jake Morrison reported to the Mars shipyards to oversee the retrofit of the ECS Vengeance. It was one of Earth's newest Dreadnought-class ships, and it was about to become something much more dangerous. His engineering chief Beth Cooper gathered her entire crew and explained that they would be working 18-hour shifts until the job was done. They would install experimental railgun arrays that had never been tested in combat. They would add armor plating and shield generators and missile batteries. Beth told her exhausted crew that they were not just building a warship. They were building retribution itself. Colonel Henry Walsh received orders to form special operations teams for deep space missions. He gathered the best soldiers humanity had from every branch of service, men and women who had trained their entire lives for combat. Among them was Sergeant Lucy Chen and her squad, who were legendary even among special forces. They began training for shipboarding actions and planetary insertions and sabotage operations. They would be humanity's scalpel cutting at the enemy, while the fleet served as the hammer smashing them. The mobilization continued for weeks, and the Velkari watched with growing concern. Their intelligence services reported that every human world was preparing for war, that factories ran day and night building weapons and ships, that millions of humans were enlisting in the military. The Velkari High Command held emergency meetings to discuss this unexpected response. They had expected protests and diplomatic complaints, maybe some economic sanctions. They had not expected this level of military buildup. 3 weeks after New Terra fell, the Velkari sent diplomatic envoys to Earth. The envoys arrived with confident smiles and offers to negotiate reparations for what they called an unfortunate incident. They believed they could smooth this over with some compensation and formal apologies. Admiral Cole received them personally in a conference room at military headquarters. He did not shake their hands or offer them seats. Instead, he played the footage from New Terra on the room's screens. All of it. Every horrible moment that the Velkari had created. The envoys watched, and their confident expressions slowly changed to uncertainty and then fear. They had not known the attack was recorded. They had not realized humanity had such clear evidence of what happened. When the footage ended, Admiral Cole stood and looked at each envoy directly. He spoke only 4 words, but those words would echo across the entire galaxy. "You have 6 months." The envoys tried to ask what he meant, but Cole simply had them escorted out. They left confused and worried. They still believed humanity was posturing to get better negotiation terms. The envoys reported back to the Velkari High Command that humans were making shows of force, that they were angry but would eventually accept compensation, that no civilized species would actually choose war over diplomacy. The High Command agreed and decided to wait. They would let the humans burn off their rage, and then negotiations would begin. They believed they understood how the galaxy worked. They believed they had conquered 17 other species and knew what to expect. They were completely and utterly wrong. President Brooks addressed humanity from Earth in a broadcast that reached every human world and station. She stood in front of the memorial wall where the names of New Terra's dead were being carved. She spoke about the colonists who had gone to build a new life in peace, about the children who had died in the attack, about the future that had been stolen from 3,000 innocent people. Then she made a promise to all of humanity and to the watching galaxy. She promised that New Terra would be answered, that the Velkari would face justice, that humanity would never allow such an atrocity to go unpunished. The shipyards worked faster. More ships were completed every week. The ECS Vengeance finished its retrofit and began combat trials. Commander Morrison pushed his crew hard to master the new weapon systems. The experimental railguns performed beyond expectations. The ship could punch through shields and armor that had previously been considered impenetrable. Other ships completed their refits and joined the growing fleet. Cruisers and destroyers and carriers all gathering near Earth orbit. Colonel Walsh's Special Forces teams completed their training and began mission planning. They studied everything known about Velkari military installations and fleet movements. They identified targets that would cripple the enemy's ability to coordinate their forces. Sergeant Chen and her squad practiced shipboarding procedures until they could do them in their sleep. They trained with new weapons designed specifically to penetrate Velkari armor. They learned to fight in zero gravity and hostile atmospheres and every other condition they might face. General Price established training camps on Mars where Marine divisions prepared for planetary assault operations. Tens of thousands of soldiers learned urban combat and defensive operations. They practiced coordination with fleet assets and air support. They studied the Velkari homeworld's geography and the layout of their major cities. Every Marine knew they might be called to fight on enemy ground, and they prepared accordingly. The 6 months passed quickly. The Velkari sent more diplomatic messages asking when negotiations would begin. They offered territory and resources. They offered to punish those responsible for New Terra. Each message went unanswered. The Velkari leadership grew increasingly nervous as they watched humanity's military grow larger and more dangerous. They began to suspect that perhaps they had miscalculated, that perhaps humans were not as forgiving as they had believed. On the final day of the 6 months, Admiral Cole's fleet gathered in Earth orbit. 62 capital ships, 200 cruisers, over 400 support vessels, 300,000 personnel. It was the largest military formation in human history. Admiral Cole stood on the bridge of the ECS Retribution. It was a brand new Titan-class warship built specifically for this campaign. The bridge crew worked at their stations preparing for departure. The entire fleet waited for his command. President Brooks gave one final address before the fleet departed. She spoke about peace and justice and the price of both.
She explained that humanity had tried to live peacefully among the stars,
that they had extended friendship to every species they met. The human fleet did not travel directly to Velkari space after leaving Earth. Admiral Cole had planned a different route that would send a clear message before the final confrontation. The fleet's first target was the Kellian outpost on the edge of contested space. It was a Velkari forward base that controlled 3 systems and served as a supply hub for their military operations. The base had strong defenses and a garrison of 5,000 Velkari soldiers. The Velkari commanders there believed they were safe, because the outpost had never been successfully attacked. The human fleet arrived in the system and immediately began the assault. The attack was coordinated and brutal. Fighter squadrons swept through the defensive perimeter, destroying automated weapons platforms. Cruisers targeted the base's shields with concentrated fire until they collapsed. Then the capital ships moved into range and opened fire with every weapon they had. The Kellian outpost had been built over decades, but it lasted only 4 hours against the human assault. Commander Nicole Turner led the frigate screen that prevented any Velkari ships from escaping. Her ships moved with precision and destroyed every vessel that tried to flee. When the battle ended, the outpost was nothing but debris floating in space. Not a single structure remained intact. Admiral Cole ordered a message transmitted on all frequencies in multiple languages. The message was simple and direct. New Terra remembers, and this is only the beginning. The destruction of Kellian outpost shocked the Velkari leadership. They had expected the humans to attack their borders or maybe raid some convoys. They had not expected such overwhelming force applied so efficiently. The High Command called emergency meetings and began recalling their scattered fleets. They sent urgent messages to their subject species demanding more ships and soldiers. But doubt had already begun to spread through their empire. Colonel Walsh's Special Forces team struck next, while the Velkari were still reeling from the loss of Kellian outpost. 3 different installations across 2 systems came under simultaneous attack. The teams inserted using stealth ships that the Velkari sensors could not detect. They moved through the installations like ghosts, destroying command centers and supply depots. Sergeant Chen's squad planted charges in a major ammunition facility. The explosion could be seen from orbit and the fire burned for 3 days. Every operation was recorded and broadcast across Velkari communication networks. The footage showed human soldiers moving through supposedly secure facilities. It showed Velkari defenders unable to stop the attacks. It showed that nowhere in their empire was truly safe anymore. The message was clear and terrifying. The hunters had become the hunted. The species that had conquered 17 others now faced an enemy that could strike anywhere at any time. Captain Raymond Fisher commanded the carrier ECS Fury, which housed 6 squadrons of the best fighter pilots humanity had. His air wing was led by Commander Melissa Grant, who had scored more kills in training exercises than any other pilot in the fleet. They began hunting Velkari convoy routes with devastating effectiveness. The fighters would appear without warning and destroy entire convoys before the escorts could react. They did not just damage the ships. They annihilated them so completely that rescue was impossible. The Velkari sent recovery teams to salvage what they could from the destroyed convoys. When those teams arrived, they found only wreckage and bodies floating in space. They also found a repeating transmission playing on all frequencies. The message said that the Velkari had given no mercy at New Terra, so humanity would offer none in return. The recovery teams reported back that the humans were not just fighting a war. They were sending a message written in blood and fire. The Velkari Empire began to fracture under the pressure. Species that had been conquered and forced into the Empire started to question their loyalty. The Draxian Concordat had been absorbed into the Velkari Empire 30 years earlier. They had never wanted to be part of it but had no choice. Now they watched as humanity systematically destroyed Velkari military power. The Draxians saw an opportunity and secretly contacted Admiral Cole. Their ambassador offered intelligence about Velkari fleet movements and safe passage through Draxian space. Other conquered species began doing the same thing. General Price established forward operating bases in the systems that humanity liberated. Her Marines coordinated with local resistance movements that had been fighting Velkari occupation for years. Lieutenant Chris Baker and his platoon trained insurgents and supplied them with weapons. Suddenly, the Velkari found themselves fighting on a dozen different fronts. Their resources stretched thin, trying to defend against human attacks while also suppressing rebellions on worlds they thought they controlled. The human fleet moved deeper into Velkari territory, destroying military targets methodically. Every shipyard was reduced to rubble. Every supply depot was destroyed. Every communications relay was taken offline. Admiral Cole's strategy was not about territory or conquest. It was about dismantling the Velkari's ability to make war. The fleet moved from system to system, leaving destruction in its wake. Wherever they went, Velkari military power ceased to exist. The Velkari tried to counterattack, but their efforts were uncoordinated and desperate. They sent their remaining fleets to engage the humans, but every battle ended the same way. The human ships had better weapons and better tactics and crews that fought with cold determination. The Velkari had experience conquering weaker species. They did not know how to fight an enemy that was stronger and angrier than they were. Commander Morrison's ECS Vengeance became legendary during the campaign. The experimental railguns proved devastating in combat. The ship could engage Velkari vessels from ranges they could not match. Morrison and his crew destroyed more enemy ships than any other vessel in the fleet. They painted a tally mark on the hull for each kill. By the end of the 3rd month, there were 47 marks, one for each survivor of New Terra. After 3 months of constant warfare, the Velkari High Command finally understood what was happening. This was not a limited military campaign. This was not about negotiating better terms. Humanity intended to destroy the Velkari Empire completely. They sent desperate messages asking for peace talks. They offered territory and resources. They offered to hand over everyone responsible for the New Terra attack. They promised reparations and public apologies. Every message was ignored. Finally, the Velkari sent a formal surrender proposal through neutral intermediaries. They agreed to accept any terms humanity demanded. Admiral Cole received the proposal on the bridge of the ECS Retribution. He read it carefully while his bridge crew waited silently. Then he composed a response that was broadcast across every inhabited system within 100 light years. His message was direct and final. You will surrender unconditionally or you will be erased. These are your only options. Choose quickly. The Valkyrie leadership panicked. They had never faced an enemy that refused to negotiate. Every species they had conquered had eventually accepted terms to end the fighting. But humanity was different. Humanity did not care about territory or resources or political advantage. Humanity cared about justice for 3,000 murdered colonists. The Valkyrie had created an enemy that would not stop until they were completely defeated. Captain Fisher's fighters continued destroying supply lines. Colonel Walsh's teams continued sabotaging installations. General Price's Marines continued training rebels and liberating occupied worlds. The human fleet continued its advance toward the Valkyrie homeworld. Every day brought new defeats for the Empire. Every day more of their subject species abandoned them. Every day their military grew weaker while humanity's grew stronger. The Valkyrie tried one last desperate strategy. They recalled every ship and soldier to defend their homeworld of Velkara Prime. They would make the humans pay dearly for every meter of space. They would force negotiations through sheer defensive strength. They still believed that casualties would make humanity reconsider. They still did not understand who they were fighting. Admiral Cole received intelligence about the Valkyrie defensive buildup. His staff presented options for a lengthy siege or a blockade that could starve the defenders. Cole rejected both approaches. He had promised that the Valkyrie would face justice, and he intended to deliver that promise personally. He ordered the entire fleet to proceed directly to Velkara Prime at maximum speed. They would end this war the same way the Valkyrie had started it. With overwhelming force and no mercy, the human fleet accelerated toward the Valkyrie homeworld. Every ship prepared for the largest battle in human history. Crews checked their weapons and ran combat drills. Marines sharpened their skills and prepared for ground operations. Fighter pilots reviewed attack patterns. Everyone knew that the final confrontation was coming. Everyone knew that thousands would die in the battle ahead. But no one hesitated or questioned the mission. The burning road led to only one destination. The fleet would arrive at Velkara Prime and they would deliver humanity's message written in flames. The Valkyrie had thought humans would forgive. They had believed human mercy was weakness. They were about to learn the terrible truth. Humanity could forgive many things, but the murder of innocents was not among them. The human fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Velkara system. Admiral Cole stood on the bridge of the ECS Retribution and looked at the tactical display showing the Valkyrie homeworld. It was a beautiful planet with blue oceans and green continents. Cities covered the surface and orbital stations ringed the world in layers, but Cole saw only a fortress that needed to be taken. The Valkyrie had brought every available ship to defend their home. 180 warships waited in defensive formations around the planet. Thousands of automated weapons platforms orbited at different altitudes. Minefields blocked the most direct approach routes. This would be the hardest battle humanity had ever fought. The Valkyrie High Command sent one final message to the human fleet. They asked Admiral Cole to accept their surrender and spare the civilian population. They promised to hand over everyone responsible for New Terra. They offered everything they had left in exchange for mercy. Cole listened to the message and then deleted it without responding. He had given them 6 months to surrender before the fleet left Earth. They had refused and continued to believe humanity would negotiate. Now it was too late for talking. Admiral Cole opened a channel to the entire Valkyrie system. His voice was calm and cold as he spoke directly to the aliens who had murdered 3,000 innocent colonists. He told them they had one final chance to surrender unconditionally, to open their defenses and allow human forces to land without resistance. He gave them 10 minutes to decide. The response came after only 3 minutes. Every Valkyrie weapons platform opened fire at once. The orbital defenses lit up with missile launches and energy weapons. The Valkyrie had chosen to fight. Cole gave the order his entire fleet had been waiting months to hear. All ships were to begin the liberation of Velkara Prime. They would target only military installations and avoid civilian casualties where possible. But they would not stop until every Valkyrie weapon was silenced and the High Command was in custody. He spoke the authorization code for Protocol Prometheus' final phase. The battle for the Valkyrie homeworld began. The human fleet moved forward in perfect formation. Each ship knew its role and executed with precision. The carrier groups led by Captain Fisher and Commander Grant launched their fighters first. 600 combat craft swept toward the planet, engaging the Valkyrie fighter screens. The space between the fleet and the planet filled with fire and explosions. Ships died on both sides, but the humans had better pilots and better machines. The Velkari fighters fell back toward the planet's defensive line. The cruiser formations under Vice Admiral Gary Pierce targeted the orbital weapons platforms. The human cruisers had longer range and more powerful shields than their Velkari equivalents. They systematically destroyed platform after platform, while staying out of effective return fire range. The Velkari tried to rush forward and close the distance, but every time they moved, the human destroyers would appear and savage their flanks. The defensive perimeter began to collapse under the coordinated assault. The dreadnoughts advanced like moving mountains of steel and fire. Commander Morrison's ECS Vengeance engaged a Velkari battle station that controlled an entire sector of the planet's defenses. The battle station had shields that had never been breached in 50 years of service. Morrison's experimental railguns punched through those shields like they were paper. The battle station exploded in a ball of light that could be seen from the surface. Beside the Vengeance, the ECS Thunder, commanded by Captain Laura Bennett, deployed kinetic strike packages. The weapons fell through the atmosphere like meteors and turned Velkari military complexes into smoking craters. The battle continued without pause for 3 days. The space around Velkara Prime became a graveyard of broken ships and debris. Velkari crews fought desperately to defend their homeworld, but they were outmatched in every way. Human ships coordinated their attacks with perfect timing. When Velkari vessels tried to concentrate their forces, the humans would split their attention by attacking from multiple directions. When the Velkari tried to fall back, the humans would press forward and give them no rest. Colonel Walsh's Special Forces teams inserted onto the planet's surface on the 4th day. They came down in drop pods through gaps in the orbital defenses. Their mission was to eliminate the High Command's ability to coordinate the planetary defense. Sergeant Chen led her squad through the underground bunker network beneath the Velkari capital city. They fought through elite guards who finally understood that mercy was no longer an option. The humans moved through the tunnels with cold efficiency, clearing room after room. General Price landed with the first wave of Marines on day 7. They established beachheads on 3 continents and began pushing inland. The Velkari ground forces tried to resist, but they had trained to suppress rebellions, not fight against a peer military. Lieutenant Baker's platoon fought through heavy resistance to capture a major airbase. Once secured, human aircraft began flying from that base to support other ground operations. The Velkari defense network was falling apart piece by piece. The siege continued for 17 days total. 17 days of constant combat as the human forces methodically dismantled everything the Velkari had built. The orbital defenses were gone by day 10. The Velkari fleet was reduced to scattered survivors by day 12. Ground forces controlled every major city by day 15. The High Command bunker was surrounded by day 16. On the 17th day, Sergeant Chen's squad breached the final doors and found the Velkari leadership huddled in their command center. The Velkari High Command tried to flee when they realized their defenses had failed completely. They loaded onto transport ships and tried to escape the planet. Commander Turner's frigate screen had been waiting for exactly this attempt. Her ships intercepted the fleeing convoy before it could reach the system's edge. The alien leaders broadcast desperate pleas for mercy. They invoked interstellar law and the customs of civilized warfare. They begged to be allowed to leave in peace. Admiral Cole's response was transmitted to the fleeing ships and simultaneously broadcast to every listening post in the sector. He told the Velkari leaders that they had taught humanity that mercy was weakness, that they had shown at New Terra what they thought of civilized warfare. But he also said that humanity was not like them, that even in war humans did not become monsters. He offered them one final chance: surrender now and stand trial for their crimes, or be destroyed where they ran. The choice was theirs. The Velkari High Command surrendered on the 17th day. Their ships powered down weapons and allowed human Marines to board. The leaders were taken into custody without resistance. They looked nothing like the confident beings who had ordered the attack on New Terra. They looked like broken creatures who finally understood the magnitude of their mistake. They had believed humanity was weak, and that belief had cost them everything. Lieutenant Baker's platoon raised the Earth flag over the former Velkari military headquarters. The moment was captured on video and transmitted across known space. The image of that blue and white flag flying over the conquered capital became the defining symbol of the war. It said more than any words could. It showed that humanity had kept its promise. that the debt of New Terra had been answered, that the galaxy had received its message written in flames. The Velkari Empire collapsed completely in the weeks following the siege. Every subject species immediately declared independence. The systems the Velkari had controlled for decades rejected their authority. The military that had conquered 17 species no longer existed. The government that had ruled with arrogant certainty was in chains awaiting trial. Everything they had built over 2 centuries fell apart in less than a month. Admiral Cole stood on the surface of Velkara Prime and looked at the city around him. It was damaged but not destroyed. Humanity had fought with precision to minimize civilian casualties. That had made the battle longer and harder, but it was the right thing to do. The Velkari had targeted innocents at New Terra. Humanity had targeted only military installations here. That difference mattered. It showed that humans could be ruthless in war, but would not abandon their principles even against an enemy that deserved no mercy. The people of Velkara Prime emerged from their shelters slowly. They looked at the human soldiers in their streets with fear and confusion. They had been told humans were weak and cowardly. Now they saw the truth. Humans were neither weak nor cowardly, but they also were not cruel. The Marines distributed food and medical supplies to civilians who needed them. They secured infrastructure and restored basic services. They treated the Velkari civilians with more respect than the Velkari military had shown to New Terra. President Brooks addressed the galaxy from Velkara Prime's capital 3 days after the surrender. She spoke about justice and peace and the price of both. She explained that humanity had not wanted this war but had been forced into it by Velkari aggression. She said the Velkari leadership would face trial for their crimes, and the evidence would be presented for all to see. But she also said that the Velkari people would not be punished for the sins of their leaders. That humanity distinguished between soldiers and civilians, between guilty and innocent. The trials began 3 months after the siege ended. They were held in the largest courtroom on Velkara Prime, where the Velkari themselves had once judged conquered species. Now the roles were reversed and the conquerors sat in chains while the galaxy watched. Representatives from 40 different species attended to witness justice being served. The proceedings were broadcast live across every inhabited system, so no one could claim ignorance of what had happened. The evidence was presented systematically over weeks of testimony. Video footage from New Terra showed every atrocity in clear detail. The survivors told their stories to a silent courtroom. Dr. Lisa Morgan described watching her colleagues burn alive in the research center. Paul Stevens held his daughter Amy's hand while he testified about losing his wife and watching children hunted through burning streets. Daniel Hayes showed his scars and explained how the Velkari had targeted civilians deliberately. Karen White presented the flight data from their desperate escape, while wounded survivors died around her. The Velkari leadership tried to defend their actions at first. They claimed New Terra was a military threat. They said humanity had provoked them. They argued that war always involves civilian casualties. But the evidence destroyed every lie. The security footage showed Velkari soldiers hunting unarmed families. The communications logs proved the attack was planned weeks in advance. The testimony of their own officers revealed that the massacre was deliberate policy meant to terrorize humanity into submission. The judges came from neutral species who had no connection to either humanity or the Velkari. They reviewed every piece of evidence carefully. They listened to every witness with patience. They gave the Velkari defendants every opportunity to explain themselves. But in the end, the verdict was inevitable. The Velkari High Command was found guilty of war crimes, crimes against sapient life and genocide. The sentence was life imprisonment without possibility of release. They would spend the rest of their lives thinking about the 3,000 innocent people they had murdered. The Velkari Empire was officially dissolved by interstellar decree. Every species they had conquered was granted full independence. The territory they controlled was redistributed to those who had lived there before Velkari occupation. The Velkari homeworld would remain intact but under United Earth oversight. A provisional government would be established to help the Velkari people build a new society based on peace rather than conquest. It would take generations, but the opportunity for redemption existed. President Brooks gave a major address to the galaxy after the trials concluded. She stood before representatives of dozens of species and spoke about what had happened. She explained that humanity had sought only peace when they entered the wider galaxy, that they had built colonies to grow, not to conquer, that they had extended friendship to everyone they met. The Velkari had mistaken that kindness for weakness and paid a terrible price for their error. She continued by saying that humanity took no joy in what they had been forced to do, that every human life lost in the war was a tragedy, that the destruction of the Velkari military machine had been necessary, but not celebrated. She made it clear that humanity would always defend the innocent and stand against tyranny, that the galaxy had seen both humanity's capacity for mercy and its capacity for justice, that the choice of which one others faced was up to them. Admiral Cole oversaw the gradual demobilization of the fleet over the following months. Many ships remained on station to ensure stability, while new governments formed in the former Velkari territory. The ECS Retribution would patrol the region for years, reminding everyone of what happened when peaceful species were pushed too far. Commander Morrison and the crew of ECS Vengeance returned to Earth as heroes, though Morrison himself seemed uncomfortable with the attention. He had done his duty and wanted nothing more than to return to a peaceful life. Captain Fisher and his fighter squadrons continued flying patrols along the new borders. Commander Grant became an instructor at the Flight Academy, teaching the next generation of pilots. She made sure every student understood that their weapons existed to protect, not to conquer, that humanity's strength came from defending the weak, not preying on them. Her lessons were filled with stories from the war and the price that had been paid for justice. Colonel Walsh's Special Forces teams became legends throughout the galaxy. Sergeant Lucy Chen received the Solar Cross, which was humanity's highest military honor. President Brooks presented it to her personally in a ceremony attended by thousands. Brooks told Chen that she and her soldiers had shown the galaxy that humanity's greatest strength was not weapons or ships. It was the unwavering commitment to protect their own and defend those who could not defend themselves. Chen accepted the medal quietly and said she had only done what needed to be done. The 47 survivors of New Terra attended a memorial ceremony on Earth 1 year after the attack. A monument was erected in the capital bearing all 3,000 names of those who died. Each name was carved into black stone that reflected the sky above. Dr. Lisa Morgan planted seeds at the base of the monument. They were samples she had saved from her botanical research on New Terra. The plants would grow into a garden surrounding the memorial. A living reminder of what was lost and what endures. Paul Stevens stood with his daughter Amy in front of the monument and found his wife's name among the thousands. Amy was 9 years old now and still in therapy, but she was healing slowly. Paul told her that her mother would be proud of what humanity had done. Not proud of the war itself, but proud that they had stood up, that they had said never again and meant it, that they had made sure the people who destroyed New Terra faced justice. The galaxy changed in the years following the war. Species that had observed from the sidelines now approached humanity with respect instead of curiosity. They understood that humans were peaceful by choice, not by weakness, that humanity preferred diplomacy, but could wage war more effectively than species who glorified combat. Trade agreements and alliances formed quickly. The balance of power shifted and humanity found itself as one of the major powers in their region of space. The Velkari, who remained on their homeworld, began the long process of rebuilding their civilization. The younger generation learned the truth about what their empire had done. They studied the trial transcripts and watched the footage from New Terra. They worked with human advisors to create something better than what their ancestors had built. It would take time measured in generations, but redemption was possible for those willing to earn it. Some Velkari rejected the new order and fled to remote systems where they tried to rebuild the old empire. Human forces hunted them down relentlessly. There would be no second chance for those who refused to accept that the age of Velkari conquest was over. The message had been written in flames, and it would not be ignored or forgotten. Those who threatened innocence would face the same justice the High Command had received. Admiral Cole retired 5 years after the war ended. He was offered positions in the government, but declined them all. He had done what needed to be done, and now he wanted peace. In his final report before leaving military service, he wrote about the nature of humanity. He explained that humans had capacity for both mercy and justice in equal measure, that humanity's compassion was real, but so was its willingness to fight when pushed beyond certain limits, that the galaxy had learned an important lesson about what happened when innocent people were harmed. He wrote that humanity had sent 2 messages during the war. The first message was written in flames across Velkari space. It said that harming innocents would bring terrible consequences. That mercy had limits and those who crossed them would face justice no matter the cost. The second message was written in the treatment of Velkari civilians and the trials of their leaders. It said that even in war humanity never lost its soul, that justice could be served without becoming the monsters they fought against. 10 years after New Terra fell, the colony was rebuilt. The new settlement kept the same name as an act of defiance and remembrance. Among the first buildings reconstructed was a school where children learned about peace and vigilance, and the price of both. The curriculum included lessons about the war and why it happened. Young people needed to understand that peace required strength to maintain and that forgetting the past invited its repetition. In ITI, the night sky above New Terra ships of the Earth Defense Fleet maintained constant watch. Patrols ran every day ensuring that no threat could approach undetected. The colonists went about their lives farming and building and raising families, but they never forgot what had happened. Every year on the anniversary of the attack, they gathered at the memorial and read the names of those who died. They honored the memory of the murdered and the sacrifice of those who answered for them. The galaxy had received its message written in flames. Humanity could be sword or shield depending on what others chose. The peaceful species that preferred diplomacy and cooperation could transform into an unstoppable force when defending its own. The choice of which humanity others faced was entirely up to them. But no one doubted anymore that when humanity gave its word, whether promise or warning, it would be kept absolutely.